will the changing process be easier in the future?
I believe it will
and
be.
The second one,
sorry.
I'm going to ask in Spanish, please. ¿Existe alguna metodología?
Is there any methodology in order to fight this resistance to change in a project, in a company?
Let me respond to the first question.
Le voy a responder a la primera.
Yes, I think change is going to be easier because I think that we are raising the next generation is coming into the workforce, and this varies around the world, but with an expectation that change is how we do business here. And if you think of your own fathers or your grandfathers who stayed with one company for their entire lifetime perhaps, and saw very little change in technology or in the workforce, is very different than what we see today with people moving from organization to organization with rapid changes, unparalleled. I think that it has become the way of it is and will become the way of doing business, and therefore I think that our workers will become very used to it and will accept it as a matter of fact, and the resistance will be reduced. As far as the second question, if I remember it correctly, what techniques, what can we do in our organizations? I think we need to look at each of the four areas that I pointed out, the personal, structural, cultural, environmental aspects, and look at ourselves, look at us managers in our own companies, and see what of those areas and what ways we are not reinforcing change, in what ways we are reinforcing status quo. I think we must, the main problem I see with techniques to change is that management doesn't appreciate often how they may be in subtle ways or not so subtle ways getting in the way of change. The structures are not set up. In fact, they expect change, but the structures, the reinforcement procedures don't reinforce the new behavior. So I think we need to look to ourselves as managers first. I think that's the first technique, and see what we are doing to block change. How are we getting in the way of our employees who may be desirous of change?
The next question is from Mexico. I believe it's in English. It is from La Universidad Autónoma de Guadalajara, in the city of Guadalajara, in the state of Jalisco, Mexico.
Yes, good morning. Professor Abraham, Universidad Autónoma de Guadalajara. Reflecting back on the brick wall structure, personal and cultural, beyond fear affecting change, what role does pride, envy, jealousy play in resistance to change?
Dr. Golden, then.
And how is it overcome? Second, when is persuasive force legitimate in implementing change? Thank you.
If I may, I'll start with the second one. When is persuasion or persuasive force legitimate? Certainly in a crisis. Certainly when there is an obvious and clear and present danger to the organization. I don't think we need to ask our employees what their opinions are. I think we need to do what we need to do to protect the organization and move it forward. Unfortunately, that technique is used far too often when a crisis, a true crisis, isn't present. Sometimes we even find organizations that will create a crisis by misreporting their budgeting or misreporting sales or overemphasizing one aspect of the organization over another. They'll actually create a crisis so that they can use coercion or manipulation or direct authority to create the change they want. That's a little dangerous, I might add. There are some side effects, potential side effects of that may be dangerous. Certainly the one we always promote is small increments of change. We don't always have the foresight to do that, but that's certainly what I'd recommend. Did Dr. Khalil, did you want to add something?
I'd just like to add something very briefly here, that if you remember I said that if we plan if the manager plan for future actions, and if he sees that there will be a problem or a potential challenge, and he prepares for it. We are talking about the preventive manager now. Maybe he doesn't need this persuasive force to be used, or if he does, it will be very, very minimal. So planning is very, very important for opportunities, for conflict, and then after the plan, we start having develop an action to avoid or minimize or postpone this problem, so we don't need to have a crisis, if you wish.
Our next question is from Mexico. It is from La Universidad Autónoma de Chihuahua, in the city of Chihuahua, the state of Chihuahua, in Mexico.
Good morning. Our question is the following. How can we face internal forces within the organization that are always resisting change for them not to be affected, because they are trying to protect their influence or their power within the organization, and that's why they're resisting change? How should we handle this?
Dr. Gold?
I think that when normally, of course, you try to educate and you try to communicate with them and you try to bring them in to be part of the change process. Ultimately, though, sometimes you have to talk rather directly, and if, depending on the power structure of the organization, sometimes in reality they need to be told this is where the organization is going, and they can go with the organization or not go with the organization, but this is where the organization is going. So I think sometimes there just needs to be some very direct dialogue in terms of where they wish to be in part of the change process, and if they don't hear, what are the alternatives for them? Which may sound a little harsh, but I think it's a reality.
The next question is from Spain. It is from La Universidad de Alicante in San Vicente, Alicante, España.
Buenas tardes. I wanted to ask the following. Your prescriptions for change can be applied perfectly well, but what happens when the goals and objectives of these changes are evil, when the goals are not right, the motivations are not right?
Which can happen, absolutely. The goals and motivations for change may be either ill-conceived or wrong-natured. And I think that's where, in fact, resistance to change in and of itself is not a bad thing. That is when the forces of resistance will help an organization not go down that path, where the culture of the organization, which may be very, for instance, ethically, there may be an ethic or a value in the organization not to pursue ill-intended goals, will resist it quietly but forcefully. And similarly, individuals' own morality may come to the fore and say, no, this is not what we want to do. So I think you need to depend on the resistance in this case and organize it.
Our next question is from Panama. It is from La Universidad Tecnológica de Panamá, the Centro Regional Chiriquí.
Good morning. Our question is, what factors should be considered when you make a decision of changing something in an organization that is going through crisis in order to get it out of the pit real fast?
That's difficult without knowing more of the details, but I think one of the errors I see is we don't know where we're going sometimes. We get into a crisis and all we're doing is there's a lot of flailing about and there's a lot of missteps and there's a lot of errors compounding other errors. I think what I would probably recommend is that the leadership and representatives of the organization take some time to sit back and say, well, where do we need to be? What is our vision? Where do we need to go in the short run? Not necessarily even the long-term goal, but where do we need to go? And now let's craft the strategies to get there to avoid some of the flailing that goes on in a crisis and some of the missteps.
Dr. Khalil, any last comment on crisis? How to deal with crisis?
My my last comment is that we should, even in setting the goals and objectives of the organization, it should be jointly set. The top management should propose goals and organization, sound it out with the lower managers and the workers, get the feedback, and then get these goals solid, where everybody is sort of participating and buying into it.
Thank you very much for your excellent questions, but unfortunately we've run out of time. Thank you again, Dr. Khalil and Dr. Golden. We hope you've enjoyed participating in this video conference. We continue transmitting programs on themes essential to our prosperity in the third millennium. We invite you to participate in our next program on November 11th, 1999, entitled Integrating Work, Health, and the Environment, Your Formula for Prosperity. For additional information on the International Training Center's programs for this year, please consult your participant's manual, where you will find the dates and specific topics for each program. Also, if you are interested in participating in training programs which will be offered by the International Training Center, please contact the Center by letter, phone, fax, or email. On behalf of all of us who collaborate with the International Training Center, I thank you for your participation and interest in today's program. Thank you, and see you again soon.